Hey there, everybody. Glad you're here. I'm going to talk about the hip today, one of the most important joints in the body. So your hips, that's these ball and socket joints here. And I'm going to go over a series of 4 stretches with you today. We're going to call it the hip series. And your hips are really important. They're important for your mobility. And it's kind of that bridge between your spine and your legs. So the hips come in and they attach them to that socket in your pelvis, and they can have a fantastically large effect on your mobility. And I believe the hips are neglected. A lot of people don't hear about hips until they're getting a hip replacement. So hopefully, if you incorporate what we have talked about here today, that's going to significantly lower your chances of ever needing a hip replacement, and we can keep your quality of life and your mobility up. So let's talk about 4 movements. Now, there's a couple little smaller ones we're not going to talk about today, but these 4 movements are the big ones that you need to focus on. And let's get into it right away. Couple ground rules I want to talk about, and I've talked about this a lot before, but I want to keep reiterating it, is that start where you are. Don't worry about what other people are doing and how flexible they are. I just want you to focus on where you're at and start slow and be positive about it. And don't try to make the stretches more than they need to be. You know, you don't need to go to an hour and a half yoga class. I'm going to encourage you to do these stretches anywhere, anytime. And I want you to try to do these stretches. There's a variety of different positions you can do that. And I'll show a couple today. So start where you are, have fun, feel a good stretch, and try to incorporate more of a cat mentality. If you've ever watched a cat, they stretch all throughout the day. I mean, honestly, dozens of times, and they just do it for 5 seconds here and there, and it helps keep them limber. And I think that mentality is really sustainable. Instead of just doing one stretch session hoping that you're gonna fix your body, if you can incorporate that lifestyle, you're really more likely to have positive long-term benefits. Okay, so the 4 things we're going to talk about are hip flexion. We're going to talk about external rotation. We're going to talk about the groin or the adductor muscles, these guys in here. And then we're going to talk about hip extension, so moving your hip back. So let's start with the first one, hip flexion. So anywhere, anytime, you can do this. And if you find these stretches are tight or they're hard for you, those are probably going to be pretty important stretches just to bear in mind, okay? So focus on those tight ones. So I'll show you sitting, but you can do it standing. You're just going to pull a knee to your chest like this, okay? You can obviously do both sides. You can lay on your back and give yourself a hug. You can do it standing if you feel like you've got good balance. And you just want to bring that knee, you're going to flex that hip, okay? And you're going to bring that knee to your chest like that, okay? As simple as that. There's other variants of it, you know, in yoga they'll call it child's pose, where you get into that flexed position, but fantastic for lower back health and of course your hips. Now, number 2, I'm going to talk about the groin. Now, I believe the groin is one of the most underrated muscle groups in the body when it comes to conditioning and flexibility, and your groin the fancy name is your adductors. Okay, so that's these muscles in here, and they're big, and they have a big effect on hip motion and pelvic health, lower back health. So again, lots of different ways to stretch them, but something like this, you know, taking a stance and kind of, I hope you can see me on the camera here, you're gonna flex one side and you're gonna try to straighten the other. Okay, so essentially what I'm trying to do is get a stretch in these muscles here, okay? Now, if you're more flexible, you can get down into lower positions. I don't know if my camera angle is going to show, but you know, you can get down and really get into it. You can hold yourself up with your hands, or you can do a triangle pose, or you can even just do old school, you know, put your legs wide apart and, you know, bend forward and kind of walk yourself back up. So that's your groin. That's number 2. And let's talk about external rotation. So I'll show it sitting, and this is the popular pigeon style stretch. Easy to do. So it's this type of a movement where you're externally rotating your hip, okay, like that. So from there, you can kind of bend forward or even just push down. I mean, a lot of people will go, my goodness, that's even that's really tight. So if you want to make it harder, you can kind of bend forward, go each way, push down, bend forward. You can do this on your back. You can grab behind your knee and pull. You can, if you're pretty balanced and confident, you can kind of do a one-legged thing and push down. Or you can use a bench, a bed, the floor, and have your leg kind of folded in front of you, that 90-degree angle, and then you can go forward that way. Okay. In yoga, there's a lotus position, and yoga is really good often for hip health. So that's external rotation. And the last one we're going to show you is hip extension. So the opposite of flexion. So hip extension is this motion and trying to open your hip up like that. Couple videos ago, I talked about kind of a standing version of this, of kind of pushing your hip back. You can do that. That's great to do at work or at home. One of the better ways would be like a kind of a lunge-like position, right? So you're going to sort of take a big stance, and then you're going to kind of sink into it and try to push that hip forward and get that back leg extended. And you should feel a stretch in the front here, okay? Kind of little tip here, lunges are pretty cool because they're a dynamic movement. And when you get into a lunge, not only are you extending this hip, but you're flexing this hip. So kind of neat. And if you're more advanced in your flexibility, you can get into kind of that split position that you see in gymnastics where you're really going into hip flexion and hip extension. But so hey, have fun with it. Really glad you tuned in. Best of luck. Just do them regularly. Be positive about it, and hope we get to see you again soon. Take care.